It was just after sunrise on September 17th, 2001, when the quiet routine of Dawson Creek, North Carolina, shattered forever. At exactly 7:42 a.m., the Craven County 911 Center received a call from a frantic neighbor. The voice on the other end was uneven, terrified, almost gasping for air as she tried to explain what she had just seen. "There's blood. There's blood on her porch. I think something happened to the nurse who lives here. Please, you need to come now." Her words cracked under the weight of panic, but dispatchers knew instantly this wasn't a prank. The address was logged. A small white clapboard house on Pine Hollow Road, the kind of modest home you pass 100 times in a small town without thinking twice. By the time the first patrol car pulled into the gravel driveway, the scene was already unnerving. Bloodstains streaked faintly across the wooden porch steps, drying into dark, rust-colored patches against the peeling paint. A set of car keys lay discarded near the front mat, half covered by a fallen pine branch. The front door was locked, blinds pulled shut. But through the slats, officers swore they saw the faint flicker of a television still running inside. The woman who lived here was 26 years old, a nurse at Craven Memorial Hospital. To her neighbors, she was kind, reliable, the kind of young woman everyone trusted. But this morning, she was nowhere to be found. Officers knocked and shouted her name, but no one answered. Moments later, one forced the door with a heavy shoulder strike. The sound of splintering wood echoed across the yard. Inside, the air was unnervingly still. The kitchen counter was spotless, dishes washed and stacked neatly. A work bag lay open on the table, ID badge visible under a stack of shift schedules. On the living room couch, a folded nurse's jacket was draped carefully as if placed there the night before. But in the hallway just beyond the entry, a different story revealed itself. Drops of blood led down the wooden floorboards, small at first, then larger, smudged, as though someone had tried to wipe them away in a hurry. The trail stretched toward the bedroom door. When officers pushed it open, what they found froze them in place. The bed was stripped of its comforter, only bare sheets left behind. A pillow was overturned on the floor, smeared with a streak of blood. A towel, wet and stained dark, was bunched against the wall, but the most chilling detail was what wasn't there. She was gone. No sign of a struggle beyond the blood. No broken window, no shattered furniture, just an absence that made the silence almost deafening. A neighbor who gathered outside later told reporters, her car was still here, her keys were on the porch, her shoes were inside, everything was there, except her. For a moment, even the officers themselves weren't sure what they were looking at. A missing person? A break-in? A crime scene in progress? But as more investigators arrived and began combing through the house, one thing became brutally clear. This was no voluntary disappearance. She hadn't walked away from her life. She had been taken, violently, from within the safety of her own home. The search began immediately. Deputies fanned out across Pine Hollow Road, questioning neighbors, checking nearby woods and drainage ditches. Bloodhounds were brought in by mid-morning, their handlers leading them across dew-soaked grass, the dogs straining at leashes as they picked up her scent. It carried them down the gravel driveway, across the street, and into a wooded thicket, before suddenly vanishing. Whatever happened here, she hadn't gone far on her own. By the time the sun dipped lower that evening, news of the missing nurse had already spread across Dawson Creek. Residents stood in clusters at the edge of her property, whispering, clutching their children tighter. A helicopter circled overhead, its spotlight raking across tree lines and backyards. Reporters began gathering on the curb, microphones ready, as yellow tape cordoned off the yard. The perfect calm of this small North Carolina town had been ripped away. In the hours that followed, detectives pieced together fragments: the neighbor's frantic 911 call, the locked door, the eerie silence of the home, the bloodstains leading nowhere. And then, just as night fell, a deputy returned from the woods behind the property carrying something in his gloved hands. A shoe. White, canvas, splattered in dried blood. It matched the pair she had worn to work just days earlier. The sight of it pulled an audible gasp from the officers gathered on scene. One of them later recalled, "It was the moment we all knew. We weren't looking for a missing person anymore. We were looking for a body." In Dawson Creek, North Carolina, September 2001, would forever be remembered not as the month when summer gave way to fall, but as the moment when the town's innocence bled away on a quiet porch along Pine Hollow Road. And the story of what happened inside that white clapboard house would unravel into one of the most haunting cold cases the state had ever seen. In 2001, Dawson Creek, North Carolina, was the kind of town where people didn't bother locking their doors until bedtime. A place where neighbors waved from porches, church bells set the rhythm of Sunday mornings, and the loudest noise on a weekday evening came from high school football practice echoing across the field. In this quiet backdrop lived a young nurse whose life seemed, to everyone around her, full of promise. She was 26 years old, full of energy, and known for her quiet but comforting smile. She worked long shifts at Craven Memorial Hospital, often the first face patients saw when they were admitted through the emergency wing. "She had this way of making you feel like you weren't just another patient," recalled one former coworker. "She looked you in the eye, remembered your name, and you knew she actually cared." Neighbors described her as a creature of habit. Every morning she left the house in her white sneakers and pale blue scrubs, lunch bag tucked under her arm, hair pulled back neatly into a bun. Her car, a silver Honda Accord with a fading bumper sticker, always left the driveway at 6:30 sharp. By 7 a.m., she'd be parking at the staff lot across from the hospital. When she wasn't working, she could be found jogging the trails near Pine Hollow Road or reading romance paperbacks under the oak tree in her yard. Her closest friends remembered her simple pleasures: iced coffee from the local diner, sketching flowers in the margins of her notebooks, singing along softly to the radio during night drives. She wasn't flashy, her best friend later told investigators. But she was steady, the kind of person who kept you grounded. You felt safe around her. And yet, behind this almost idyllic routine, there were cracks, hairline fractures no one fully noticed until it was too late. One of her co-workers remembered seeing her step into the break room with her phone, whispering in a tense tone. When another nurse entered, she quickly hung up, brushing it off with a nervous laugh. "Just my brother," she'd said. But the look in her eyes told a different story. Another neighbor recalled arguments spilling faintly through the open windows of the house on Pine Hollow Road. Voices low at first, then raised, sharp, angry, followed by long silences. "You could tell something wasn't right," the neighbor admitted years later. "But you never want to assume the worst." Still, the image most people carried of her was not of someone in turmoil, but of someone building a future. She had plans to start her master's degree in nursing, and there was talk of applying for a supervisor role at the hospital. She was saving money carefully, every paycheck marked with handwritten notes in a spiral-bound ledger. In her bedroom, tucked into the corner of a dresser, police later found an envelope with "First Home" scribbled across the front, stuffed with crisp bills she had been putting aside for months. She wanted to stay here in Dawson Creek, her mother later said. She wanted her kids, when she had them, to grow up the way she did, knowing everybody in town, feeling safe. Her church community echoed the same picture: a young woman who taught Sunday school for preschoolers, led the occasional prayer circle, and was always the first to bring a casserole when someone was sick. One of the deacons called her the glue that held younger members together. But alongside these warm memories, darker threads began to emerge. A friend from nursing school recalled that she had once confided about a man she was dating, someone who seemed charming in public, but controlling in private. She never said much, but she hinted that he didn't like her working night shifts. He'd call constantly. Sometimes she wouldn't pick up, and you could see the fear in her face when she checked her voicemail later. At the time, no one pressed her. Dawson Creek was a small town, and people often preferred polite distance over uncomfortable questions. In her diary, recovered much later by investigators, she had written in neat cursive, I feel like I'm being watched, even when I'm alone. I don't want to believe he could hurt me, but sometimes I'm not sure anymore. Looking back, those closest to her would agonize over these signs. The nervous phone calls, the late-night arguments, the sudden silences when someone walked into a room. But in the summer of 2001, she carried herself as though everything was fine. She still stopped by the corner diner after long shifts, still teased her coworkers about their sloppy handwriting on charts, still filled her yard with geraniums and sunflowers. To anyone on the outside, her life was ordinary, beautifully ordinary. And that's why, when she vanished, the shock was so profound. Because in Dawson Creek, she wasn't just another nurse or another young woman. She was their nurse, their neighbor, their friend. The thought that something terrible could happen to someone so deeply woven into the fabric of the community left people shaken to their core. One coworker's words, recorded in a local news segment years later, captured it best. She wasn't just one of us. She was the best of us. If it could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. September 15th, 2001, was unremarkable in Dawson Creek, North Carolina, at least on the surface. A muggy, late summer Saturday, with kids playing in sprinklers, church cookouts filling the air with the smell of charcoal, and the hum of cicadas carrying into the night. For her, though, it was the day everything came undone. She had finished a 12-hour shift at Craven Memorial Hospital just after 7 p.m. Tired but cheerful, she left the staff lot in her silver Honda Accord, the same routine she had followed hundreds of times. CCTV from the hospital captured her walking across the lot in blue scrubs, a small duffel bag slung across her shoulder, her hair pulled back tight. She waved briefly to another nurse before unlocking her car. That was the last clear footage of her alive. At 7:46 p.m., she stopped at the Dawson Creek Market on Elm Street. A grainy security camera caught her at the register buying a carton of milk, a loaf of bread, and a small pack of instant coffee. She smiled politely at the cashier, slid cash across the counter, and walked out the door. By 8:15 p.m., she was back at Pine Hollow Road. A neighbor recalled seeing her headlights sweep across the driveway and hearing her car door slam. "I saw her walk up the steps with her bag," he later told police. "She looked tired but fine. Nothing seemed off." But sometime after 9 p.m., the normal rhythm shifted. Phone records later revealed a series of unanswered calls from a man she had been seeing. At 9:07, 9:15, 9:23, each one went to voicemail. At 9:27, she sent a single text. "I'm exhausted. Please stop. Tomorrow." That text would be the last she ever sent. At 9:41 p.m., a different neighbor recalled hearing raised voices from her house. "It was muffled," she said, "but you could tell it wasn't good. I thought maybe a couple arguing, but then it went quiet, like someone had slammed a door." Another witness, driving home from work just before 10 p.m., swore they saw a figure lingering near the edge of Pine Hollow Road, close to her driveway. "It was dark, but I thought it was a man, standing there like he was waiting for someone. It gave me chills." By the next morning, Sunday service at Dawson Creek Baptist began without her. Her absence was noticeable. She was supposed to help in the nursery that morning. When she didn't show, another volunteer filled in, assuming she'd overslept after a long shift. But by that evening, her mother grew uneasy. Calls went unanswered. Messages remained unread. The Honda was still parked neatly in the driveway, untouched. Lights glowed faintly inside, but the blinds stayed closed. At 6:18 p.m., her mother drove to Pine Hollow Road and knocked. No answer. She circled the house, calling her daughter's name, peering into windows. The sight that made her blood run cold was the bloodstain on the porch step. Faint, but there. Panicked, she ran across the street and begged a neighbor to call 911. The official missing person report was filed at 6:42 p.m., less than 24 hours after she was last seen at the market. But in that narrow window of time, something unspeakable had already happened. Investigators would later reconstruct those final hours in haunting detail. The unanswered calls, The muffled argument, the possible shadow of a man near the driveway, a young woman who seemed tired but safe when she returned home, and then vanished without a trace before dawn. To the people of Dawson Creek, the realization was devastating. In a town where crime rarely exceeded petty theft, where residents left their keys in the ignition at the gas station, the idea that one of their own had been taken from inside her own house was unthinkable. And yet, as detectives combed through the evidence, it became chillingly clear. She hadn't simply disappeared. She had been silenced. The question that haunted the town from that night forward was simple, but unbearable. By whom? By Monday morning, the disappearance had already ignited whispers across Dawson Creek. The town's population barely crept above 8,000, the kind of place where everyone knew who drove what truck, who baked the best pies at the church bazaar, and who had missed Sunday service. And when she didn't show up to her shift at Craven Memorial, alarms went off. She never missed work, one coworker told investigators. If she was late, she called. If she was sick, she still tried to come in. For her not to show without a word, it wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. By 9:01 a.m., police officers were knocking on her door. The Honda was still parked in the driveway, locked, her purse resting in the passenger seat. The front door showed no signs of forced entry. When officers peeked through the window, they saw her duffel bag from work sitting by the couch, as if she had dropped it there after coming home. It looked like she had stepped inside and vanished. The news spread with wildfire speed. Local radio stations mentioned her name during the morning commute. By lunchtime, flyers bearing her photo, smiling in scrubs holding her newborn nephew, were taped to lampposts and gas station doors. At the high school football field, a volunteer team formed to search the wooded edges of town, flashlights in hand even before nightfall. Neighbors recalled the strange details they hadn't thought to report right away. "I heard arguing around 9:30, one woman said. "I swear I saw a man on Pine Hollow Road," another insisted. "There was a truck idling near the intersection, dark green, maybe a Chevy, didn't recognize it." For every story, there were two more rumors. Some swore she had run away with a secret boyfriend. Others whispered about drug debts, affairs, and old family feuds. The gossip spilled from diners to barber shops, every conversation coated with suspicion. At Dawson Creek Baptist, her name echoed in prayer circles. The pastor asked for divine protection, while mothers clutched their children tighter, scanning parking lots with new paranoia. "If it could happen to her," one woman said, "it could happen to any of us." False leads came in waves. A gas station clerk reported a young woman matching her description in Jacksonville, 40 miles away, buying cigarettes. Police checked. It was someone else. Another caller claimed she'd been spotted at a Greyhound terminal in Raleigh. Again, false. A hunter found scraps of fabric near the Neuse River and called it in. The lab later determined it was just torn canvas from an old camping tent. Each dead end drained the town's hope a little more. By midweek, organized searches stretched across farmland, creeks, and abandoned barns. Deputies knocked on doors, asking about late-night visitors, unfamiliar cars, odd noises. Some families were cooperative. Others bristled at the intrusion, muttering about witch hunts and private business. Reporters soon swarmed Dawson Creek, parking satellite trucks in the Food Lion lot. Bright lights and cameras turned quiet intersections into crime scene theaters. Local kids skipped school to watch news anchors deliver their breathless updates. Day 4 of the missing nurse mystery. Her family stood at the center of the storm, clinging to hope. Her mother, voice trembling, gave a televised plea. "If anyone has her, please, bring my baby home. She's kind, she's hardworking. She doesn't deserve this. Please let her go." But the camera zoomed in on her father's face, pale, exhausted, unblinking, and the town whispered again. Why didn't he speak? Why does he look so cold? Suspicion was no longer a shadow. It became a weapon. Families who once shared dinners now avoided each other. Theories divided friends, and every neighbor became a potential suspect. And yet, Through all the noise, one fact refused to fade. Her car sat in the driveway. Her bag lay inside the house, and a faint trace of blood still marked the porch step. She had not left on her own. By the end of that first week, the search had grown frantic. Helicopters circled farmland, K-9 units scoured pine groves, and neighbors left their porch lights burning late into the night. Still, no trace of her surfaced. And as fear thickened, a darker realization crept into the hearts of Dawson Creek. This was no longer just a disappearance. This was something far worse. Something had happened inside that house on Pine Hollow Road. By the end of the first week, Dawson Creek deputies knew this was no ordinary missing persons case. The little details kept gnawing at them. Her Honda was in the driveway, locked. Purse and wallet inside. Front door shut. No signs of forced entry. On the porch steps, a faint smear of blood barely visible against the wooden grain. And in the living room, her duffel bag from work, sitting neatly by the couch as if she had just set it down. Nothing added up. Sheriff's deputies began combing through the house with forensic teams. They swabbed the blood on the porch, bagged a half-drunk bottle of water from the kitchen counter, and dusted for prints on the doorknobs. To the naked eye, the rooms looked ordinary. Clothes folded, dishes drying in the rack, TV remote on the coffee table. But beneath that everyday normalcy, something sinister lingered. In the laundry basket, they found a men's t-shirt stained dark near the collar. In the bathroom sink, faint traces of what looked like diluted blood, washed down but not completely gone. Her phone was missing. So were her house keys. The sheriff's department knew this wasn't abandonment. This was a crime scene. Detectives began pulling phone records. Calls and texts revealed a troubling pattern. Late-night arguments with her boyfriend, frantic messages to friends about fights, and one last outgoing text just before she vanished. "He's here. I'll call you later." But the call never came. Neighbors were re-interviewed. Some admitted they'd heard loud arguing on the night she disappeared. Others recalled seeing an unfamiliar truck idling near Pine Hollow Road, dark green, maybe a Chevy. Deputies canvassed nearby convenience stores and gas stations, pulling security footage. On one grainy tape time-stamped at 11:57 p.m., a man was caught dumping a large white trash bag into a dumpster behind a feed store. His face was obscured, but his build and gait set investigators whispering. The bag was recovered. Inside, women's clothing, sneakers, and a set of scrubs, all stained with blood. The case was no longer just a missing person. It was now a probable homicide. State crime labs in Raleigh worked overtime. The blood on the porch matched hers. The clothes in the dumpster? The DNA was hers as well, but mixed with traces of another, male, close relative. Then came the carpet fibers. A vacuum bag pulled from her apartment revealed pale green fibers that didn't match any rugs in her home. Investigators tracked them back to an old carpet style common in late 80s manufactured homes, the kind often found in rural trailers. Detectives now had both DNA and physical trace evidence, tying the crime to a specific environment. Phone triangulation placed her boyfriend's cell within 200 yards of Pine Hollow Road on the night she vanished. He told police he had been at his cousin's in Jacksonville. But tower pings shredded his alibi. The net was tightening. While forensics worked, detectives dug into his past. What they found painted a disturbing picture. He had grown up in a fractured home, bouncing between relatives. School records noted violent outbursts. At 18, he was arrested for assault after a bar fight. 2 ex-girlfriends filed restraining orders. One described him as charming until he snaps, then he's a monster. He had cycled through jobs, mechanic, warehouse hand, farm laborer, never keeping one for long. His criminal record hinted at drug use, theft, and violent temper. To the community, he was the troubled boyfriend who couldn't hold it together. To detectives, he was now prime suspect number 1. Surveillance of his movements revealed bizarre behavior in the days after she vanished. He shaved his head. He burned trash in a barrel behind his mother's trailer. He showed up at a pawn shop trying to sell jewelry that looked eerily similar to hers. When deputies picked through the ash pile behind the trailer, they found melted buttons, a zipper, and the twisted remains of a phone battery. It was the kind of evidence you couldn't explain away. Meanwhile, Dawson Creek was unraveling. News outlets ran updates daily, rumors thickened. Strangers pointed fingers at each other in grocery stores. Mothers clutched daughters tighter, whispering that the killer was still out there. The sheriff made public appeals for patience, urging calm. But in the court of small-town opinion, the boyfriend was already guilty. He was bad news from the start, a neighbor told the press. She should have left him years ago, another muttered. But the sheriff's office knew rumors weren't enough. They needed a smoking gun. It came 2 weeks later. A hunter deep in the pine woods off Route 12 stumbled upon something partially buried in shallow earth. The smell hit first, then the sight of fabric, pale and bloodstained. Deputies rushed in, cordoning off the scene. They had found her remains. Near the grave lay a scrap of duct tape, a piece of rope, and a men's work glove with sweat-stained lining. All of it bagged, all of it tested. And within days, DNA confirmed what detectives already suspected. It tied back to him. The case had shifted from suspicion to certainty. Armed with the DNA, the fibers, the phone records, the surveillance footage, and the burned remnants of her belongings, detectives moved in. When he was arrested, he denied everything. He sneered, shouted, called it a setup. But under pressure, his story cracked, then shifted, then collapsed entirely. The small town that had spent weeks whispering now watched in silence as deputies led him out in handcuffs, head bowed, the weight of evidence too heavy to escape. The discovery came not with flashing sirens or a dramatic chase, but with the quiet steps of a hunter cutting through pine woods on the edge of Route 12. It was early morning, damp air hanging heavy with the smell of rain-soaked earth and cedar. He was tracking deer prints when something caught his eye, a patch of disturbed soil, uneven and darker than the ground around it. At first he thought it was just an animal burrow, but then he saw the fabric, pale, blood-stained, jutting out like a ghost from beneath the dirt. The stench hit next, sharp, sour, unmistakable, the kind of smell that no hunter ever forgets. He froze, heart hammering in his chest, before stumbling backward and fumbling for his phone. 911, he stammered, voice shaky. I think I found her. Within the hour, deputies had sealed off the clearing with yellow tape. Forensic vans lined the gravel road, their headlights cutting through the mist. Reporters weren't far behind, swarming the edge of the woods, long lenses aimed at the tree line. Sheriff Daniels himself walked the site, jaw tight, his boots sinking into soft earth. He had worked dozens of crime scenes, but nothing like this. The shallow grave told a story more chilling than words could capture. The soil was barely turned, as if dug in desperation. The body was wrapped loosely in a sheet, blood seeping through in faded maroon stains. A section of rope clung to her wrists, frayed but still tied. Duct tape, peeled and dirt-caked, stuck to strands of hair. Flies buzzed low, a constant drone over the clearing. The silence was otherwise total, broken only by the clicking of cameras and the muffled instructions of crime scene techs. One detective muttered what everyone was thinking. She didn't stand a chance. The sheet was carefully lifted. Inside lay the remains of the young nurse. She was dressed in her work scrubs, the same ones she had worn home the night she disappeared. Her face was partially obscured by soil and tape, but the outline was unmistakable. Beside her body, investigators recovered more. A men's work glove, its lining soaked in sweat, a cigarette butt pressed deep into the mud, and a broken chain that her mother later confirmed had once been her daughter's necklace. The emotional weight of the discovery was crushing. Deputies stood silent, some bowing their heads. Even the hunter who had stumbled across the grave sat on the tailgate of a patrol truck, staring blankly at the ground, unable to shake the image. As news spread, Dawson Creek froze. Church bells tolled at noon, and townspeople gathered on sidewalks, holding hands in silence. For weeks, many had prayed she would be found alive, clinging to any rumor that suggested hope. That hope died in those woods. Reporters broadcast from the site, their voices hushed, describing the grim procession as the body was lifted, bagged, and carried into the waiting van. Onlookers watched with tears streaming, some whispering prayers, others muttering, "I knew it was him." Her mother collapsed when the sheriff delivered the confirmation. Her father, rigid and pale, whispered only one sentence, "Now we know. Now we bury her." The autopsy later revealed the brutal truth. She had died from blunt force trauma, her skull fractured by repeated blows. Defensive wounds lined her forearms, proof she had fought with everything she had. The duct tape suggested she had been restrained, her final moments a battle for breath and survival. Worse still, traces of soil and carpet fibers clung to her clothes, matching those found in the suspect's trailer. The forensic chain tightened, leaving no room for doubt. In the days that followed, Dawson Creek became a town in mourning. Vigils lined Main Street with candles and photos. At her hospital, co-workers wore ribbons pinned to their scrubs. Patients remembered her gentle voice, her tireless care. But alongside grief came anger. Anger at the man who had stolen her life. Anger at the warning signs ignored. Anger that evil had lived among them in plain sight. Detectives moved quickly now, confident in their evidence. They had blood, DNA, carpet fibers, the burned belongings, and now the ultimate proof. Her body, buried in the woods with his glove beside her. The case was no longer a mystery. It was a story of rage, violence, and betrayal, one that had ended in a shallow grave off Route 12. And though justice had not yet been served, the people of Dawson Creek already knew who had done it. The only question left was how long it would take for him to break. The interrogation room was stark and cold, lit by a single fluorescent bulb that buzzed faintly overhead. A steel table separated the suspect from two seasoned detectives, their files spread neatly before them. A camera in the corner blinked red, recording every twitch, every breath. For the first 30 minutes, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking. He denied everything, claimed he hadn't seen her in days, said he was at his cousin's house in Jacksonville that night. Detective Alvarez slid the phone records across the table. "Funny," he said, tapping the printout, "because your phone was pinging towers right here in Dawson Creek, just a few blocks from her house." The smirk faltered. Then came the fibers. Pale green strands found on her clothes, identical to the carpet in his mother's trailer. A photograph was placed in front of him. His eyes darted to it, then back to the detectives. "You're twisting things," he muttered, shifting in his seat. Detective Monroe leaned in, voice steady but sharp. "No one's twisting anything. We've got your glove beside her grave. Your DNA mixed with her blood. Your lies don't work anymore." For the first time, his hands trembled. He rubbed them together, sweat beading at his temples. The detectives pressed harder. They described the shallow grave, the rope, the duct tape. Each word was deliberate, heavy, dragging him further into the truth he was trying to bury. Finally, Alvarez placed the final piece on the table, the burned remnants from the trash barrel, her phone battery, her jewelry. "This isn't coincidence. This is you, trying to erase her." Silence. His breathing grew uneven. The room seemed to shrink around him. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he broke. "I didn't mean to," he said, staring at the floor. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." Monroe didn't let up. "Tell us what happened." He swallowed hard, eyes darting between the detectives and the camera. "We fought. She kept saying she was leaving. She said she was taking everything, that I'd never see her again. I lost it. I lost it." His words spilled faster, ragged, as if once they began he couldn't stop them. "I hit her. She fell. I thought she was just hurt, but then she wouldn't stop bleeding. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I wrapped her up. I tried to clean it. I thought if I buried her, no one would know. His voice cracked, the mask gone. I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to stop. Detective sat in silence, letting the weight of his confession hang heavy in the room. The camera caught every word, sealing his fate. At 2:47 a.m., he signed the written statement. His scrawled signature below the typed confession marked the end of his denials. When the door opened and deputies led him away in cuffs, the smirk was gone. The arrogance had evaporated. What remained was a hollow shell of a man who had finally spoken the truth, a truth more horrifying than the lies he'd tried so hard to maintain. By the time the trial opened in late 2002, Dawson Creek was suffocating under the weight of the case. Reporters packed the courthouse lawn, satellite trucks lined Main Street, and locals stood shoulder to shoulder, craning for a glimpse of the man who had haunted their town for nearly a year. Inside, the courtroom was hushed, tense. The suspect walked in shackled, his head shaved, wearing a plain, county-issued jumpsuit. Gone was the swagger of his earlier denials. His eyes darted nervously, avoiding the gallery where the victim's family sat in the front row. Her mother clutched a folded photo of her daughter in scrubs, lips pressed tight to keep from trembling. The prosecution laid out their case with precision. First came the forensics, DNA evidence linking him to her blood, carpet fibers from his trailer found on her clothing, and the sweat-soaked glove recovered at the shallow grave. Jurors leaned forward as lab technicians explained how each piece fit seamlessly into the puzzle. Then came the surveillance footage, grainy video of a man matching his build, dumping a white trash bag into a feed store dumpster the night she vanished. The bag recovered contained her clothing, soaked in blood. Finally, the confession. Jurors watched a muted portion of the interrogation video, where his shoulders slumped, and his mouth formed the words, "I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to stop." The defense tried to counter, painting him as a troubled young man who snapped in the heat of an argument. They argued it wasn't premeditated, that it was a crime of passion born from desperation. But the evidence was unrelenting. One by one, witnesses took the stand. Neighbors who heard the late-night screams. Co-workers who described her bruises, her whispered confessions about abuse. Family members who begged her to leave him, their voices breaking as they relived the warnings unheeded. Her mother's testimony silenced the room. She described the last phone call, her daughter's voice heavy with worry, and the moment she found the apartment empty. She clutched the jury with her grief, her words a knife through the still air. She was my baby. She was my everything. And he took her from me. Gasps echoed when the prosecutor replayed that line. The trial stretched 2 weeks, but the verdict came quickly. After less than 6 hours of deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom. The foreman rose, hands shaking slightly, and delivered the words the town had been waiting for. Guilty, first-degree murder. The judge's sentence followed swiftly. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His voice was steady, but the weight of finality echoed through every corner of the room. The victim's family wept quietly, holding each other. Some members of the community exhaled in relief. Others sat stone-faced, grappling with the fact that someone they once knew, someone they had waved to at gas stations and seen at grocery stores, had committed such horror. As deputies led the convicted killer away, chains clinking against the floor, one thought lingered in every heart present. Justice had been served, but the cost was irreversible. When the gavel finally came down, Dawson Creek tried to breathe again. Life moved forward in small steps. Children went back to school, the church bells rang on Sundays, and the hospital where she once worked reopened her old station with a new nurse. But nothing felt the same. The small rental on Pine Hollow Road was sealed off, blinds drawn, the porch sagging under the weight of silence. Neighbors crossed the street rather than walk past, whispering that the house was cursed. Every creak of the floorboards inside was frozen in memory. The duffel bag on the couch, the faint smear of blood on the porch step. At the cemetery, her grave became a gathering place. Friends left flowers, hospital patients left notes scribbled on napkins, and co-workers lit candles on her birthday. On anniversaries of her disappearance, the community held vigils, the flame of each candle flickering against the night sky, a reminder of both light and loss. Her story became a cautionary tale, repeated in hushed tones in kitchens and classrooms. Parents told daughters to be careful who they trusted. Pastors preached that evil can hide in the most ordinary places. Detectives who worked the case never forgot. Some admitted the smell of damp pine still pulled them back to that shallow grave in the woods. Others kept her photo pinned above their desks, a reminder of why persistence mattered. And for her family, the wound never closed. Justice had come, yes, but healing was harder. 20 years later, the case still cast a long shadow over Dawson Creek, a quiet town scarred forever by the truth that evil doesn't announce itself. It lives next door, waves politely, and waits for the night you least expect it. The story of Dawson Creek reminds us of one thing: monsters don't always live in the shadows. Sometimes, they sit across the dinner table. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you're ready for another case just as haunting, click the video on your screen now. Don't watch it alone.